Good day, I'm Anne Dolenshek, and thank you for tuning into Anne on Influence. In this episode, we're in conversation with MJ Khan. He is an award-winning strategist, academic, Bookmarks Judge, and category vice chair, NextGen Awards Judge, keynote speaker, and a very proud father. He heads up group digital communications at Sasol and is responsible for social media, online and digital campaigns across 22 countries. We chat about the power of communication in all its formats, the evolution of digital communications over the last decade, and the complexity thereof these days. We disprove the myth of the short attention span, and we discuss Sasol's most recent campaign in detail. Enjoy.
This podcast series has been made possible through an exclusive sponsorship from SA's #1 nano influencer platform, theSALT. Most brands have a communication line to their existing customers, but do not have a way to get them to have additional positive brand conversations. theSALT solves the problem by identifying brand fans and getting them to talk more about their positive brand experiences. theSALT have a database of over 230,000 registered brand fans and in-depth information on each to perfectly match an influencer to your brand. Reach out to them today and see what they can do for you.
Afternoon, MJ. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm so excited for our conversation because I feel like everyone knows who you are and you bring so much to our industry. So super, super excited. Before we get into our conversation, I would love for you just to kind of tell us all about kind of your journey to becoming the head of group digital communications at Sasol.
An absolute pleasure. I think you and I, we've got a great career together going back like 10 years. Can you believe when we were working in an agency together? And I've been really lucky. It's been a wonderful journey. So I wrote my first radio ad back in 2001. I started off in classical advertising. I sort of veered into more strategic corporate comms at that point around the mid-2000s. Really enjoyed that, understanding sort of the power of communication. I then moved into digital around 2009. And I've sort of been in that space since then. So digital quite firmly, jumped around between different agencies every couple of years. I'll move to a different agency. It's just sort of the way I used to do things. And about 8 years ago, I moved to client side. And that's when I joined Sasol. Been there ever since. And yeah, just absolutely loving it. So a really fun, interesting 21-year journey to date.
Amazing. And I feel like you were saying you jumped around from agency. I feel like we all do that. Because it is, no day is the same, it's new challenges, and we just kind of learn more skills the more places we go, which is great.
Definitely. And I find, that I'm so grateful for that. So some of the agencies were really small and boutique and that's, sort of cutting my teeth in the early days. And you'd have 1 or 2 clients and you'd have to sort of figure out everything for them, but not have support structures in place. So, you'd have to learn on the job. So if there was something new at that time. So say, for example, search engine optimization, which was really new back in the day, I'd have to like sort of scramble and figure it out, and try and be the best at it. And that's really the thing, 10 years ago, if you were embedded in digital communication, you could learn about everything. And now, because of the depth of it and the specialization, you have to be really deliberate and intentional about this is where I'm going to play. This is what I understand. This is what I know. And this is what I don't know. And be completely comfortable with that, saying if it's to do with A, B, and C, I'm your person. I don't know everything, but I know enough and I'm going to learn more. But if it's to do with D, E, F, then no, not for me.
I think that's so important, especially in this day and age where it's so easy for us to just go off on tangent, be like, yes, I can do it all and scramble in the background and try and learn it. But to your point, there's so much that there's a specialist that you can easily just pull in and say, you know what, this is not my field, but you know what, this person can really assist and they're already the expert and it's going to take them 2 hours to do where it's going to take me 12 hours just to learn.
100%. And we're seeing this a lot more with social media platforms. So it is really easy to become proficient in social media platforms from a marketing perspective a while ago, where it was really about copy and maybe rudimentary design. But with the age of sort of a lot of video like TikTok and with even the rise of video in Instagram and YouTube, you're finding that you really need specialist video skills for that, which is why the transition from copy to design has been a lot more jarring just because the learning curve is so much more steeper. Those of us who traditionally did a lot of social media marketing are now having to step back and say, hang on, there's all of this, let's call it complications and complexities that we need to account for. And if we want to really be the best at our game, we need to be able to say, this is what we can do, and this is where we need help.
I love that. And I think it's something that we all should learn. And I feel like it's sometimes a bit difficult for us to do. But MJ, that brings me to a really good question. So you just said earlier that you started off in classic advertising, where you wrote your first kind of radio ad. So what then attracted you to go over to digital and social media at the end of the day?
Oh, geez. So communication is communication. I think often when we talk about digital, we give it its own sort of bucket, or we make it separate from everything else. But the truth is, we've always, as human beings, we live by the power of communication. So I've always been fascinated by communication. What sort of got me really interested in digital was two things. Now, one, the idea that digital is participatory. So it's like radio, it's like TV, it's like print, except you as a user, you're participating in it somehow. You are self-selecting what you want to consume. You are engaging with it on your own terms. And I really like that. I like that idea of choice. I like that idea that there's not just choice in terms of how much you can consume, but choice in terms of how you want to approach it, Like if I think about when I was growing up, we used to love family time on a Friday night, and that's when there'll be A-Team and Airwolf, and I'm giving away my age here. But at 7:30 on a Friday evening, that's when you have to be in front of the TV, otherwise you'll miss it. And we're not bound by that anymore. We can watch what we want on demand, on our own terms. And part of that is the reason why I really like digital. It was taking communication principles, understanding that you're sort of joining it with this level of engagement, this level of participatory selection, and being able to do it also at scale. All of a sudden, because of digital, I could reach so many more people than I could just traditionally. So I thought that was a really interesting aspect of digital that I love to explore, and I sort of just went down that path.
I completely agree with you. And I think for me, digital is also what you were saying. It's not that one-way communication where a brand is speaking at you. It is that participation. It is that two-way communication where brands can seem accessible, where you can actually have conversations with your consumers or your fans. And I think that makes it so much more exciting, but also so much more complex because you have to get that tone right.
100%, gone are the days where as a brand, you have any semblance or semblance of control, right? And everything has to be sort of manufactured in a certain way, because now as brands, you're realizing more and more, you don't necessarily have control of your brand. You don't have control of what you do. It's the community does. It's open on social media, which is why as a brand, you also need to be very strict and about how you position yourself online. You need to be strict in terms of whatever you're doing, question yourself, is it self-serving or does it have value to external stakeholders? And we might touch on this a little later, but that forms part of my principles in terms of how I create content and what are those things I factor in before I even press publish on any piece of content.
I think that does lead me into my next question is I really want to understand more about your industry and kind of the common obstacles that you guys face when it comes to comms and marketing. I mean, you're not in like this B2C fun industry, so to speak. You guys are really doing really important and serious work. So how do you then communicate with people and kind of what's your tactics to kind of overcome those obstacles that you would find?
So it's wonderful, right? I'm not sure, maybe let me take a moment to tell all your viewers a little bit about the company that I work for. So Sasol is a global chemicals and energy company. We're in 22 countries and we have customers in over 100. We're primarily B2B chemicals. That's industrial chemicals, but we also have a large energy footprint. So in South Africa, for example, we've got over 400 retail sites servicing 6 million customers. And that really gives me an interesting balance with regards to having B2C on one end of the spectrum and B2B on the other end when it comes to chemical products that are very specialized, that have a very small market, simply because we would sell it onto a manufacturer that would then incorporate that into cosmetics or paint or even synthetic glass for cell phones. There's millions of applications. And what I find really interesting is it's not necessarily the distinction between B2C, business to consumer, and business to business. Andrew Perkins famously said back in 2014, it's not B2C or B2B, it's human to human, and I really take that to heart.
Fair
So
enough.
when I'm engaging with with someone within a B2B lens, sure, the processes might be different. The purchasing funnel might be slightly different, right? In terms of all the things you need to consider when you're buying something at a B2B level versus a B2C level. But the objectives are still the same. The emotional triggers should still be the same. So I think there's some differences, but there's a lot more richness in the similarities if you start treating people as human.
I love that. And it's actually so true. And it also comes down to that adage of like, people don't buy from brands, they buy from people. And I think that's also why we are talking to you today, because obviously we're talking about influencer marketing. And before we go into what Sasol actually does with influencers and how effective that actually is, which was a bit puzzling to me, but the proof is in the pudding. I want to take us back a little bit, and I would love to understand from you, where in your career did you first encounter influencer marketing? I kind of want to know when it was, what format that took. Was it kind of celebrity endorsement? Was it your clients? And really, what was your expectations when you started with it?
Wow. So you're taking me back 10 years. I did my first look. There has been sort of instances of we didn't call it influencer marketing back in the day. So I mean, if I recall, the first time I did anything close to that was probably around 2005, 2006. And what happened then was I was working with a broadcaster on a magazine show for television. And we were negotiating deals for different restaurants in terms of we'll use it as a location for a shoot, and in return we get some value out of it. So that was perhaps the starting point, and then the presenters themselves would have that value. Also, back in the day when I wrote my first radio ad, I used to be a radio presenter. So this was for a community radio station. So there would be some level of exposure with myself in that space, and my ability to then sort of sell products based on that, right? Simply because of the audience. So I dabbled in it a lot in the past, but the first time I actually did it in a very meaningful way at an agency level was in 2012, and it was for a toothpaste brand. And back then, I think it was really undefined. It wasn't the rise of influencer marketing the way we perhaps understand it now
No.
in terms of its maturity cycle. It was really about using celebrities for their reach more than influence, if that makes sense. So yeah, contracted out to a celebrity, paid them a lot of money to promote the product. And it didn't really work out because, as you said earlier, social media is all about the feedback loop. It's about not just broadcasting, but listening to people when they talk back. And when people ask the celebrity questions related to their product, it was really evident that we weren't paying for influence, we were paying for reach.
And I feel like this was 2012. So I would guess the main platform would have been like Twitter. Am I right?
Yeah, so Twitter and Facebook, those were the big ones back in the day,
Yeah. But to your point, and since then we've obviously a bit more, I wouldn't say regulated, but there's a couple of things in play now where they have to disclose whether it's paid for. Because to your point, all of a sudden, I'm this big celebrity, and all of a sudden I'm talking about toothpaste. I'm pretty sure everyone was like, sure, let me ask a couple of questions, and then realize, you got paid for this. You don't actually use whatever it was day to day, or you just weren't paid enough to actually interact with us, which is the reality, right?
Definitely. I think it really speaks to, us being more sober about it. I mean, when you're using someone as a platform, as a reach platform, versus when you're really tapping into influence because someone has built up some level of credibility within that niche. And you're tapping into that, and it's evident. And I think these days, there's a lot more skepticism. So it's more apparent when it's just a quick sort of broadcast versus I actually believe in this product, therefore it's a partnership.
And I think that is exactly it. It's that credibility, and it's also that resonance, right? These days we won't just choose someone because they're famous or for the amount of followers up. We would have all these questions and look into who they actually speak to and their content and their values, which is great. And you said that that campaign didn't really work out for you guys. So I wonder, what was your kind of thoughts after that campaign? Were you like, oh, influencer marketing, this is a hack? Or what was the thought process after that?
It was disappointing. I mean, look, I mean, this is back in 2012 where even something like paid media for digital wasn't necessarily at that point, it was really mature, and a lot of brands understood how to do it really well. You know, back then, a lot of us were booking paid media through one platform, and it was a really sort of
100%.
laborious, cost-intensive sort of process. You know, now it's really democratized, right? So now anyone with a credit card can go to Facebook and promote a post with like 3 clicks. And it wasn't like that back in the day. So it was sort of weighing up, okay, cool, you're going to go down this route, influencer marketing, or you're just going to go pay for the ad. It's still quite novel. There wasn't any level of saturation because Facebook just never monetized as aggressively as they do now. And you were able to get similar results. So for me, yeah, it was, okay, cool, we tried it. It was a while till I tried it again. So I was definitely a little jaded by the experience and just found that through my own owned efforts, I could get better results. So yeah, I mean, but again, that's not necessarily a fault of influencer marketing. It's just my experience and my circumstance at the time.
No, absolutely. And I think most people back then felt the same. So for us, I think, like we were saying earlier, you and I come a long way. And we were kind of working at the same agency when all of this was starting off. And for us, it was in the electronic space was bloggers, not so much celebrities. And there was also like, okay, so we have this handful of bloggers. These are the people we know. These are the people we're going to get on the campaign. And we didn't have the finesse to also measure the metrics that we can today. So it was all about like, okay, how many views did your blog post get? And you just kind of trusted the person to tell you, you know, how many likes did you get on Twitter, Facebook? So it was very vanity, but it was a novelty. Like clients loved it. We loved working. It was like a new media that came in, but we couldn't really measure it. So it's nice that we've now progressed so far that we can now be so specific of what we can measure. And I think that's also then my next question. Since your disappointment with a toothpaste brand to now, which is about 10 years later, how do you feel about influence marketing now these days?
Oh, well, so I think the industry, rather, let's just call it that as an umbrella term, it's really matured, and you know I'm quite grateful as well. So I was able to also participate in creating, like, for example, the white paper on influencers in South Africa. You know, being able to disclose that something is an ad, and also sort of track and see what's happening around influencer marketing in terms of people understanding the business nature of it. You know, and the transactional nature of it and what it entails. But and I mean, part of what you did back in the day and what I've learned a lot from you at that agency was how you really looked at it from an interest and niche perspective. So I gained so much from you back then, you know, and we're starting to see a lot more of that translate into what a lot of agencies are doing these days. So hat tip to you, definitely. But yeah, I think there's a level of maturity that's come about. I think there's increasingly some level of skepticism around it, which won't go away, and I think it's just going to get louder and louder. But I think that's actually a good thing. I think if people are skeptical about the messages that are being sort of shared, you know, with them, that it then goes back to, why do you trust this individual? And if you trust this individual, do you believe they have, you know, your best interest at heart? And do you think they'll endorse something that resonates with you? So it is becoming an interesting space. You know, it almost reminds me of, like, if for those of you who enjoy classical media theory, and you know the classic example is War of the Worlds, right? And initially this radio show, and when they played it on radio, a lot of people lost their minds because they thought it was an actual alien invasion.
Yeah.
And you can sort of look at how, I think this was the 20s or 30s, back then, you know, there was this level where if someone sees something on radio and you don't have that familiarity or the sophistication to understand that it's just fiction, it might cause real panic. Whereas now we're a lot more skeptical, you know, whether it is just the abundance of information we have at hand, whether it is our own choices, whether it is us just being skeptical of the system, you know, if you want to call it that. I think there's a level of sophistication, a level of skepticism that's inherent in all of us as consumers these days that will then go out and regulate, in a way, influencers. And if an influencer is saying something that's inauthentic, they'll be called out for it.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I think it's a very good thing. And I think we've seen it, especially over the last 3-4 years, where this has started happening, where people are really skeptical and they have weeded out, so to speak, the disingenuous influences, where you've seen a lot of them disappear just purely because they were just doing campaigns for the sake of doing campaigns. And the ones who really stuck to it and is amazing now are the ones who stay true to who they were, who was really picky about who they worked with, the messages they put out, and they're the ones on the rise. So I completely agree with you. And also with this maturity came with the beauty sector. Also, I think recently, was it this year in the UK, we said, if you're going to use a beauty filter, if you're doing a beauty campaign, you have to disclose that because, again, it's misleading advertising. So I know a lot of people think it's silly and people can spot an ad a mile off, but I also think there's equally as many people who just want that transparency, whether they can see it or not.
And to your point, I think whether you can spot if something's an ad or not is inconsequential. Whether you can spot whether something has value or not, that's what we need to be interrogating. And I think sometimes we fixate on, is it an ad or not? And the question is it valuable? So I often hear this myth about how our attention spans are like a goldfish, right? 8 seconds. And that's been debunked scientifically. And I push back and I say, if my attention span is 8 seconds, how is it that I'm able to watch a 3-hour, 5-minute movie, Avengers Endgame, without even blinking that often? That's an amazing attention span. How am I able to watch an hour of Game of Thrones? So it's not that my attention span is sort of dropping or whatever it is. It's that I want to consume great content. And similarly, it's not whether an influencer is sharing an ad or not. It's whether what they're sharing resonates with me, whether I feel value and I see value in it. And that's the conversation we need to be having, not whether something is an ad or not.
You're so right. Because I look at those things and it's like, oh, there's drop off after 8 seconds or 10 seconds. I'm like, yeah, because after that 8 to 10 seconds, I'm not interested anymore. But then I can watch another video of pets or cats or jokes or someone pulling a prank. And that's like a full 2-3 minutes now that's allowed on there. And I'm sitting there like glued to it. And I know hundreds and thousands of other people are too. Then again, to your point, why am I still paying attention to that? But you're telling me my attention span is teeny tiny. So it's all about, to your point, is it bringing value to my life? Is it entertaining me? Is it educating me? Why am I watching? And I think that's also where creators are becoming more and more creative in how they deliver messaging, because it's literally their jobs to engage people.
100%. And with that as well, I think the market will decide, the market will determine, whose voice gets amplified, gets shared, gets celebrated, and gets endorsed. So the market will decide. I think we as consumers, we need to give ourselves more credit. It's not a case of, influencers pulling the wool over people's eyes, as is sometimes treated as the narrative.
And unfortunately, that's the overarching narrative, right? And it really angers me because there's so many other things we can talk about than just people not putting #ad. Yeah, we know. MJ, let's talk about your most recent campaigns. I know you've been doing some really cool things with Sasol. And I'm not meaning like it's out there wacky cool. It's just like you literally using the voices of your consumers, the people who actually use your products every single day, to tell the story of Sasol and just to kind of create that content for you. Again, going back to resonancy, right? So I think my first question is probably, why did you choose to go the influencer marketing route when there's so many other marketing channels available?
Okay, great question. So this was for one of our recent campaigns, and it was a bursary campaign. And the reason why I opted to use an influencer marketing strategy over and above all the other hygiene that we do is because I had a very specific objective. And everything I do, regardless of, again, coming back to the conversation we had earlier about B2C, B2B, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. For me, I'm really strict on my principles. Like, what is the objective? What are you trying to achieve? And then from there, who do you want to talk to? What do you want to tell them? And what do you want them to feel? And how are you going to measure it? So I'm very strict on my principles, which is why any conversation I have internally in the business with any of my colleagues, or even externally with our agencies, I always come back to those objectives. And when we looked at the bursary campaign, there were two things I noticed, based on what I've tracked in previous years. The first thing I noticed was this year we just didn't have enough time to create enough assets. So normally we'd have a longer lead time with bursaries. We'd be able to go and interview current bursars and get their perspective on why Sasol bursaries are valuable. And we simply didn't have enough time to actually shoot a lot of great content like that in the cycle, So we were able to create some static visuals, but that was about it. So we needed more creative, simply put. And a great way of doing that is by reaching out to influencers and content creators and saying, here's my challenge. Can you create content within your own point of view and framework? So that was the first guiding principle. The second guiding principle is I'm never, ever comfortable with just doing the same thing I do all the time. I don't benchmark against my peers. I benchmark against my previous campaigns. And I said, okay, cool. We've done all this great stuff in the past. So our hygiene for these campaigns are amazing because we get great results for bursaries. It's something I'm very proud of. But I'm like, I can always do a little bit better. I can always try and reach that candidate that I haven't been able to reach with all my other platforms and tell them about it because it's such a great opportunity. I want everyone who meets the criteria to be able to apply for it. And we thought some of these content creators, these influencers, they are able to tap into some audiences that I might not necessarily have been able to tap into. So let me then utilize them to just spread our message into the furthest sort of spaces, So it wasn't going mass per se, that we took care of in terms of our digital spend. It was about going niche. It was let's speak to people. Let's have a person that can engage with their community, that can answer questions. There, for example, if there was a language barrier, we could overcome it that way, and we could start speaking to a lot more people so that this great message could go out. So yeah, those were the two things that really informed me sort of raising my hand and saying, let me try and influence the strategy.
So what were your main objectives besides just reaching those niche audiences and the people that you really want to speak to? In other words, kind of like, what did you really measure on this campaign? Because, bursaries, that's a fantastic campaign, but what are you measuring to see what success looks like?
So with bursaries, it's fundamentally really about getting people to visit the website and apply. So at its core, it's a very simple objective, something we can measure digitally, right? So we can measure traffic. What I always look for over and above making sure we get people onto the site to apply is to make sure that we get as much diversity as possible. We do understand that we need to have a lot more representation when it comes to women engineers. It's really important. And that's one of my passion points is how do we challenge the status quo in what is sometimes viewed as a traditionally male-oriented industry, which is engineering. So how do we ensure that we get more women through the pipeline? So how do you inspire girls who are in matric and studying science to know, hey, there's an opportunity for you to take this further, to become an engineer? It's not just stereotypically something that men do. And for me, that's really important. So over and above just getting people to go into the site and register, and obviously we're very transparent as well. So our criteria is very clear, it's out there. And part of that is also we're comfortable with who we are. We know what we want, we know what we offer, and we know what it's meant for. So we're very clear on that. Like, you go into that website, you'll see the criteria. So with that in mind, that empowers me, knowing that I'm trying to get as many people as possible. It really is about how do we get people to apply and how do we widen the net so we get a lot more diversity in applications. Those are my objectives.
Amazing. So you've just said as well, you obviously want to speak to a diverse audience. You want to reach those women. What kind of influences did you use? Was it the big macros? Was it smaller guys? Was it nanos? Who did you really use to speak to these people? And did you exceed your expectations?
We definitely did exceed expectations. I was actually quite chuffed with the campaign. So, when it came to choosing the influencers, whether they were the sort of the macro or the micro, we went back and we thought, if we really wanted reach, we could have done it ourselves. We have over 1 million followers on our social media platforms. I mean, organically, we reach like 70 million people a month, So we could have done that. We could have had those conversations, but we didn't want that. We didn't just want reach, and we didn't just want some form of celebrity endorsement. We wanted to speak through people that really believed in it and that knew people that could benefit from bursaries, So we wanted that authentic conversation. So we went micro, we went nano, we went really small, really niche, because those were the gaps that my paint couldn't reach, and that's who I wanted to speak to. I wanted it to be intimate conversations amongst a few people, because if we could, out of this entire exercise, get maybe even 500 more people to apply for a bursary that never knew that existed and didn't know this opportunity existed, I would have been happy. And I'm glad to say, we got so many diverse applicants because of the process. And I'm going to attribute some of that success to the influencer campaign.
Oh, I love hearing that, because it is, again, making those opportunities for people who would have never even known about it. So I love that.
Yeah, it's a great campaign.
So MJ, I know a couple of weeks ago you were also a judge at the Bookmarks Award, and I'm really excited because when we chatted, it was still under embargo, and now we're finally getting to chat and you can actually speak about it. I want to know, was there any influencer campaigns that kind of stood out for you, and why did they stand out for you? And is there any kind of lessons you will take from there, or little tips that you will incorporate in your campaigns going forward?
So lots of trends that pop up, from a sort of awards perspective when it comes to influencer marketing. In fact, what I probably might do is I might reflect on what has happened in previous years. So I'm very lucky when it comes to Bookmarks. This is my third time judging Bookmarks, and I'm also lucky because I'm vice jury chair for the panel as well. So it was quite a great experience. In fact, at the moment, I'm actually judging the NextGen Awards. And
Amazing.
that I'm judging for another 10 days, and then I think the winners will be announced next month. But back to Bookmarks, what I found previously, what was really interesting. So you see a personality like Shoma Josie really blow up, and she took over the scene a couple of years ago, and it was really interesting to see which brands collaborated with her at that level, and you can see she lends herself so well to brand partnerships. But again, it has to be the right brand partnerships. So a few years ago, you saw her pop up a lot with different products and different brands, and it was quite good because it made sense. It was a really good fit. Interestingly enough, what I saw a lot of this year was a lot of comedians playing in that space, So, and again, it's not something new, comedians and influencer campaigns, they do have some level of synergy that's historical, but a lot more this year, whether it was in the form of processed meat or alcohol, or even comedians, doing an influencer campaign for a publisher. So yeah, that was one of the trends that we saw this year, is brands leaning into comedy. And I think part of that might just be because of all the, post-COVID trauma. And trying to regain some level of normalcy. Yeah, well, post, right? So trying to overcome the doom and the gloom, and using humor as that vehicle for it. So we saw a lot of that this year.
It's funny that you said that, because I've been picking up on that as well over the last 7-8 months, and I'm just seeing all these amazing comedians that we've always kind of followed everywhere, and they're doing well, but all of a sudden just brands are just partnering with them like crazy. And I've been so happy for them because they are such good fits. And I had the exact same thoughts. I was like, everyone is just looking for that silver lining after a couple of years of just bad news. And I absolutely love it.
And I think part of it also speaks to a brand's sort of need or desire to position itself as more human friendly, to position itself as more playful. And if it's not coming out sort of authentically from the brand, in terms of the brand has to transition to that phase, sometimes it helps just to bring in an outside voice like a comedian to just be that catalyst to accelerate that journey or that positioning, But look, it doesn't always work. When we were judging, we also noticed some brands who use comedians, and it completely fell flat because there was a very distinct disconnect between the brand values, and even the products and the comedian. It's a lot like, sure, creatively you could make a funeral policy really clever, but should you be?
that comes back to influence marketing or just creating an advert, right? Because I can cast anyone in an ad. And to your point, we can do something great. We can put it on all the channels and we can probably get that reach. But when it comes to influence marketing, there's so much more that you need to consider. Like, is it a brand fit? Is it valuable? Is it just, do they share values with the brand? And I think to your point is like every creator and every brand should also think, this is great, but should I be doing this?
No, and that level of skepticism is good because I think as a brand as well, what I've learned sort of historically is sometimes brands, we sort of lose our way. So we have a very distinct brand essence. And because of the rise of a social media platform or a community that might not necessarily, it's an imagined community or it's a virtual community, it might not necessarily represent your customers. But in attempts to try and court this community, you sometimes might lose your brand essence. And I mean, I had this experience about a decade ago where I worked with a certain cosmetic product, and it was a very clear and distinct brand essence that I stood for. But the social media community, specifically the Facebook community, that liked this brand, wanted it to go down a different direction. And what happens sometimes is you lose so much of your brand essence trying to chase, this sort of virtual community that you start losing who you are and you start diluting your brand. So it is a really important discussion that when brands look for influencer marketing, that it is a right fit, that it makes sense for your brand, that you're proud to have that association. And it's not just a chase for reach or even just a chase because someone is cool at the time.
That is a very important one because sometimes we do see that. A lot of clients will ask for specific influencers just because the competition or everyone else is using them at the time. And I think that also comes down to us to consult and say, they're great, but I don't think this is right for you, and these are the reasons. But then that also brings me to a good question. You just said you worked with a brand and the online community was kind of wanting something else from the brand. What do you do then? Is it like, oh, maybe my brand needs to evolve with my community, or do you stay steadfast and hoping you'll attract the kind of clients or consumers that you are hoping for? Like, is it a chicken and egg kind of question? I don't know.
Well, for me, there's two inputs into that. The first input is those external factors, right? Those who want you to go down a certain route. Are they actually your customers? And that's a really important question because, at the end of the day, as brands, you're not simply there for engagement. You're not simply there to have a good time. You're there because you have a product to sell. You have a business to run. And you have to be really sober about that and say, okay, all of this noise that's happening around the brand, the sentiment, does it come from actual stakeholders who have a vested interest in the brand? Are they customers? Are they shareholders? Are they members of the community that have a vested interest in your brand because of whatever reason, And if not, is it just noise? And a lot of brands are not having those conversations where they can separate the noise from the earnest voices. So that for me is really important, is understanding, who's making, who's contributing to that online conversation and what is the value of those individuals. And to be honest as well, like if you got a bunch of views on something, but it didn't move the needle or it didn't actually, result in any brand recall, like what is the value of that? So I often give the example, and I love doing guest lectures. My background's in lecturing as well. So I used to love education. I still do. And whenever I do a guest lecture, I sometimes give the example of the Guinness Book of Records. And I talk about how the actual brand Guinness, as much as it started it, or even, the Michelin star system, where the tire brand Michelin started it, they get lost in the conversation. You don't even associate Guinness Book of Records with the actual drink Guinness anymore.
No.
And like, is there something to celebrate Guinness for, or has it just diluted so much, So similarly, as a brand, if you remember the joke, but you don't remember the ad, how effective and powerful is that? So brands should have these conversations where they understand, like, that conversation happening around the brand. Is it a meaningful conversation? Do these people having the conversations, do they have a vested interest in your brand? Like, are they your consumers? And is this a conversation that you put value to? Or is it just because it's something relevant at the time? So that's the first factor that I think a brand needs to consider. And the second thing really is around what's credible for a brand. brands have to be really honest about the lanes they play in, about what it is they represent, and what it is they can do, what it is they can't do. Brands can't be everything to everyone, unless your brand is you make oxygen, I guess. But so earlier when I spoke about the bursary program, I'm very clear about the criteria. I'm very clear about the objectives of the bursary program. And if someone comes and asks me, hey, listen, I want to study this thing that, we don't cater for, I have to tell them, thanks for this, but this is not what we offer. We can't help you. Sorry. And a lot of brands don't want to do that. You want to appear to be everything to everyone. You don't want to choose a lane. You don't want to be very focused on what you can offer, because a lot of brands feel that, they need to be everything to everyone, and I don't know why. So yeah,
I
for
think
me,
that's
it's
an
about being
excellent
credible.
answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
That's
think
right.
that's an excellent answer. And I think that also comes back to brands are also influencers at the end of the road, right? You also influence your consumers. They need to know what you stand for, what your values are. And if you aren't clear about that, you can't build up that credibility. You cannot, unfortunately, be everything to everyone. It is what it is.
100%. And I think it's an important conversation to have, and it's okay. You don't have to be the biggest, but you should always try to be the best.
I love that. I should put it on a t-shirt. Should be the MJ Khan slogan. MJ, this has actually brought us to almost the end of our conversation, and I've really, really enjoyed chatting to you and listening to how you've grown since I started knowing you, and just you listening to your wisdom. And I think to leave us, can you maybe give us 2 or 3 key learnings you've learned over the last decade of actually implementing influencer campaigns?
Wonderful. Okay, so a few things I'll just rattle off, I guess, as it comes to mind, right? And the first thing does come back to my principles around objectives. Be very clear about what you want to achieve. Let that guide you. Let that inform who you want to talk to, what do you want to tell them, how do you want to make them feel, and give them a call to action. Give them something to do. Don't just broadcast. So for me, those objectives are important, and it's important to also take the influencers through those as well. They need to believe in the same vision you do. It simply can't be a case where a brand has a certain hierarchy and doesn't disclose whatever it needs to disclose to influencers and expects them to work in a siloed way. You're going to get disparate and fragmented results. You're not going to get the most because you haven't taken people on that journey with you. And the same applies to internal influence as well, with staff and employee advocacy, which I think is really the next big phase of influencer marketing. It is leveraging your internal advocates, right? So draw up your objectives, have a very clear vision, and get people on that journey with you. Let them believe in the vision and take them. So that's number one. Number two is to also provide support. And I find a lot of the times, brands or even individuals or small businesses will sometimes spend money on paid media, but they won't follow it up with actually responding to all the comments. They won't be fast enough to engage with people. And I'm like, you're spending so much money to attract customers, but when people have an earnest query or they want to find out more, you're not there for them with that same scale and that same eagerness. So with that as well, with influencers, it's really important that when we do influencer campaigns and there's certain pieces of content that go out, that we know when it goes out, so that my team's on standby to jump in to support. Because when there's questions, that's really important. That for us as a lead, we need to be able to convert that and lead in any sense, whether we want to educate a customer more, move them down the funnel, whatever it is. We need to be there. We need to be supporting influencers. We need to also endorse them as well. We want to make sure that from their points of view, they get their content gets shared by the brand, because that's an important endorsement for their own brand, for their own morale. And we want to build that. We want to celebrate the people who work with us because we value them just like how we assume they value us as a brand. So for me, those things are really important, is being accessible as a client, making space, doing immersion sessions, education sessions, taking people on that journey. Don't just give them the objectives and assume they know everything about your brand, educate them, make them believe in the brand, and it just becomes a much richer experience. And
I think those are big ones. Oh, you've got another one? Please.
I was just going to say, just don't be too prescriptive. There's a reason why you're using influencer marketing. It's not because you want the same message shared 15 times. I mean, if that's the case, just use paid media. influencer marketing has to come with its own flavor and its its own thing. So as much as you give certain guidelines, don't try and restrict and constrict it too much. Allow some level of creativity, because within that diversity you might tap into something you never thought of before. So don't just limit campaigns based on your own understanding and your own expectations and experience. Embrace influencer marketing with all the diversity that it brings as well.
MJ, I think those are amazing ones. And I'm sure that resonates with everyone, because that is, at the end of the day, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to attract a diverse audience. You want to speak to everyone within your target market in a way that really relates to them. So thank you for that. So MJ,
Thank you so much. This is great.
No, this was so much fun. I think lastly, where can people connect with you online if they want to find more about you and what Sasol's getting up to?
Oh, wonderful. So I am at Concerning MJ on all the major platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Recommend, if you do want to connect with me professionally, LinkedIn is probably the best space, because that's where I share a lot of content. A lot of my reflections are there. I'm also very proud. I mean, so Sasol has the largest corporate page in Africa on LinkedIn.
Amazing.
So, I
Congratulations.
share. Oh, thanks. And I share a lot of what sort of what I've learned over the years in terms of building that presence. So if you're into that, connect with me there. On the other platforms, it's more fun. I do share quite a bit of interesting sort of marketing content across the board. But yeah, at Concerning MJ everywhere is where you'll get me. And of course, through me, you'll also get a really interesting point of view and a taste of working at Sasol, simply because I get so many opportunities, through Sasol to do really great things, whether it's watching Banyana pick up the gold trophy in Morocco, which I was able to do last month, or even next month, where I'm going to be traveling the country with solar cars that have come from around the world in the Sasol Solar Challenge. So it's always fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I want to follow that journey for sure. MJ, thank you so much again for joining us, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
I hope so, Anne. And I must say, in closing, you've been a great inspiration and really one of the bedrocks for influencer marketing. So really great to see how you've as well grown the space. So hats up to you.
Oh, thanks, MJ. And it means so much coming from you. So thank you. Have a good one.
You
Much
too.
love
Bye.
to you too.